So one of the things I love about my metal shop is this 4-foot by 8-foot fixture table. But one of the things I hate about my metal shop is that most of the time, half of this table is covered in stuff. Tooling, clamps, grinders, whatever I'm using on any particular project. Now I can clean it off, but I don't really have a space for that stuff. Today we're gonna solve that by making a tooling cart. So the original plan with this was to make this from scratch. I even drew one in SketchUp, but my friend Lewis bought this at an auction, this cart with the drawers, and I thought that actually is gonna be perfect and it's gonna save me some time. That being said, I'll still put the drawings for the cart that I designed in the description of this video in case someone would wanna build them off those dimensions. Now you'll also notice I have essentially a fixture plate that would go on top. I cut that on the plasma table like 2 years ago, and this has been something I've wanted to make for quite some time, as you can tell. My first thought is to put in a riser so that the bottom part of the pins on my clamps for the fixture table have somewhere to go. In order to do that, I'm using some 2-inch flat stock because there's a 2-inch lip on the inside of this little tooling cart. And that's going to basically be built up, and then I'm going to have the fixture plate that I cut on the table welded to it. Now I need to get around these sort of bolted corners, so I just marked up and I'm going to bend up this piece of 2-inch by 1/8 using the Hausfeld bulldozer die. This is a great little kind of like mini press brake that you may have seen me use in previous projects. I'm using 1, 2, 3 blocks sort of as little fixture stand blocks just to keep things together, and then I'm going to see how my plate sits on top, and I can do a quick tack weld before fully welding it over on the table. Now originally the table I was going to make was going to just be this 12 by 24, which is what the plate that's cut is, but the cart I have here is 18 by 24, which will actually be nice. It'll give me some room to put some tools on the side. Now the table that I'm using has 5/8 pinholes for all the fixtures, so obviously the piece of plate has 5/8 holes plasma cut in it. The plasma cut plate is actually not really good for holding onto the pinholes. The accuracy of the plasma cut holes is really not round or kind of precise enough in order to get a good grab. So you'll see how I solve that in a second. But by welding this in from the bottom, it's just going to give me like a nice registration, and it fits nicely in the top of the tooling cart, and it's going to look and be very stable. You can see how loose the actual fixtures are though when I put them through that only 3/16 inch thick plate. Now to solve that, I decided that I would take a piece of 3/4 inch plywood and bolt it to the bottom. I'm using a little trick here with a hammer to basically get some impressions from where the steel is, and that's going to give me my marks for where I need to cut this so that it'll fit inside of that kind of tooling tray. Now the thought here is that if I use this 3/4 inch plywood and then chase out those 5/8 inch holes, I'll be able to get just a little bit more surface area for the bottom of the fixture and the clamp to grab. And since I'm not really planning on clamping anything in this plate, really just holding my tooling in place, I think it's going to work out just fine. Also, from a spark and safety perspective, this is going to be buried underneath the piece of metal, so it's going to be very difficult for any sparks to get to it, and I really don't have to worry about it catching fire or anything like that. I drilled some holes from the top down that are going to allow me to just put some screws into the piece of plywood, and then I can basically fasten it together and chase out all those holes. I did countersink those screws though, just so that they'd sit nice and flush, and you can see the way that the plywood fits nicely in the bottom. I don't really have to worry about those weld spots. They'll kind of just mush into this plywood when I tighten everything up. Now that I have that in there, I'm just using a regular 5/8 drill bit, and I'm basically just boring straight through the holes that were cut by the plasma table and drilling through the 3/4 inch plywood. This is a messy and kind of long process, but in the end, the drill bit gave just enough of a tolerance that the clamps fit really nicely, and I just put a piece of wood underneath that so that the tip of the drill wouldn't hit my table. So you can see I'm just sort of checking the clamps fit really nice. And also too, the wood will sort of wear in over time from me constantly taking in and putting out fixtures, and I don't really want the holes to be oversized. The good thing too is that if they do become oversized, it's just a matter of replacing the piece of plywood, and I'll have a fresh registration and a better kind of tolerance again. With that done, the next task was to replace the wheels on this cart. They were really crappy, like stem casters, so I took off these little brackets that was holding onto them. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to weld in some coupler nuts, some half 13 coupler nuts that are just going to kind of hit the corner Originally, I was going to use plate casters, but stem casters can be really good for this application. And this is a good trick if you ever want to add casters to the inside of angle iron. So these are just zinc coated coupler nuts, and I ground off as much of the coating as I could get to, and then basically welded them into the corner. And then you can see I'm able to thread on these heavy duty casters. I'm going to go ahead and do this on all 4 sides. And by grinding off that zinc plating, you get rid of some of the toxic gas that comes off when you weld these, but you want to be very careful anytime you weld like hardware store hardware, anything that has a coating on it, anything with paint near it. I'm wearing a Papper, a powered respirator while I'm welding this, and I have a fume extractor going, but if you're going to weld anything zinc coated, you might want to try to be outside or in a very well ventilated area. I can thread on the casters, and these are actually going to raise the whole cart up quite a bit, but they're a lot bigger and they're going to roll a lot better across all the different obstructions that are always on the floor of my shop. Now that's done, I just do a quick deburring of the tooling plate and just kind of clean up the tops of those holes. I wound up using the bottom of the plate in relation to where the plasma table was because I felt like I had a little bit better hole tolerance. You can kind of see it starting to come together. The next thing I wanted to add was some straps to the side that would hold clamps or hold my grinders. And these were actually in the original design, but obviously in this case I wasn't going to weld them on. I wanted to screw them on with some zip screws just to avoid having to repaint the whole side of the tooling cart. So I just marked these out. I put them on with some clamps. Once I had that all sorted out, I'm just going to use some nice heavy self-tapping screws. And you can see here I can put clamps on them, or I could even just put my grinders. I'm going to put 2 straps on one side and 1 strap on the other. And this is the same 1/8 by 2 inch sheet stock that I had earlier when I was making that little frame. Self-tapping screws are a great option for stuff like this. The other thing too is it makes these a little less permanent. If I were to weld them and I wanted to change the orientation or change the design, I'd have to actually cut all the welds off. So with these zip screws, I can just take them on, put them off, and it's a lot faster than having to drill and use nuts and bolts and stuff like that. Once that's done, I can just basically do some deburring, spin it around, and I could add one to the other side as well. The idea is that anything that I would normally keep on my welding table, grinders, clamps, 1, 2, 3 blocks, even just, spray bottles of cleaner or anti-spatter spray, everything should be able to go on this cart to keep everything off my table. I have a really bad habit of just piling stuff up on the table while I'm working, and then I just push it around with whatever I'm working on, and it can be pretty frustrating to try to be productive in that way. I wanted to paint these straps so that they wouldn't rust, so I just grabbed some gray paint and painted them. I also painted the top of the fixture plate so it also wouldn't rust in the humidity. And I went with this gray, which kind of matches the original cart, but not really. Once that was done, I just clamped this to the sidewall and put 1 zip screw in the side, which would just keep the fixture plate from moving around. And already it's nice and mobile. I can start adding the drawers back in, and I'm excited to get all this stuff off of the welding table. A quick cleanup with some degreaser, and then I can start loading it up and loading the drawers. The drawers don't have drawer slides, which is kind of annoying, but I think it's going to be all right. And I am very quickly filling this up with all the clamps and all the other fixtures that I have, all my fixturing pins. And then the drawers are going to be great for, like I said, 1, 2, 3 blocks or squares. I can put my grinders over there on the side and then put my big fixture blocks down on the bottom. And just like that, my extremely cluttered welding table is pretty clear for probably the first time since the day I brought it into the shop. I do keep some stuff over on the right side, which is where I particularly work, like where I have my magnet and I've got my vise. But overall, this is a huge upgrade for my metal shop. I've got to make some room around it on the floor and clean up some of the mess that's all over the floor of the shop. But otherwise, it's going to be super helpful to just be able to bring my clamps to the work, keep this stuff off the table, give my grinder somewhere to go, and it's going to help me be more productive and get a lot more real estate out of this big table. Thanks so much for watching. Check me out here on Instagram, and I hope to see you on the next video.